Good morning, welcome to the Internet Seriously. This week's stories, screen time and online safety. With Australia banning social media for under 16s and more people turning to screen-free parenting, we examine emerging research that suggests that screen time might not be as harmful as we once thought. ChatGPT phishing attacks. WhatsApp has taken down 6.8 million accounts linked to phishing attacks and scam messages written by ChatGPT. We ask, is there anything that can be done to turn the tide on scams and fraud? And finally, public policy analysis specialist, online child protection expert and trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation. This week we welcome Andrew Campling, Director of 419 Consultancy, as our guest this week. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Internet Seriously. We had a little bit of a problem there with our animation, but this really is live, folks. Welcome to the Internet Seriously, where we make sense of the internet. I'm Alice Taylor, and I'm a digital policy researcher and former speech and language therapist.
I'm Mark Roberts-Shaw. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Oxford Information Labs, and I love this definition, given that we're talking about Children's Day, of what a Chief Operating Officer actually is. And it goes like this. You know how in a big playground, someone needs to make sure all the games are working, the kids are safe, and everything is fun and fair? Well, a Chief Operating Officer, or COO, is like the person who makes sure the whole playground runs smoothly. They help people do their jobs, make sure everyone has what they need, and fix things when something's not working.
That's very nice. So that's a children's friendly definition.
Absolutely.
And finally, we're welcoming Andrew Campling as our guest this week. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
It's very nice to have you here with us. Yeah. Oh, you've got some confetti. And while we're on, Andrew, before we get into today's topics, we want to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and TikTok. The icons are appearing now. Oh, in front of Mark. I thought they were going to appear in front of Andrew, but here they are in front of Mark. We are also aiming to get live comments up and running in the next few weeks, and we can see your comments after the show as well, so please do comment. So this week, our first topic is screen time and online safety. So Australia have proposed a social media ban for under 16s, and a growing number of parents are embracing screen-free parenting. So it seems like public concerns about children and screen time are on the rise. Andrew, do you think this is justified?
I can understand why a lot of parents are heading in that direction, but in reality, I'm concerned that sort of the potentially children are missing out on some of the positive aspects of access to the internet. And so one of the things I'm working on is there's a workshop coming up in October around sort of moderating access to age-inappropriate content. And we're looking at some developments to try and get parental controls to interwork. Because currently,
so what does that mean? Yeah, for the lay person.
Yeah, so I'll try and do it in the style of the playground.
Yeah.
I think the challenge at the moment for parents is there are a lot of parental controls. So from Apple, from sort of Android, different platforms have them, and then all the different applications have them as well. But they're all sort of self-contained islands. So what we're putting forward is a proposal that they can communicate with each other so that a parent doesn't have to learn the intricacies of potentially tens or even hundreds of different things. They can just sort of do the settings once system. And it can share with others, so that for things like screen time and so on, you can say, well, let's limit my child's access to, say, 3 hours a day. And not have to worry about what that means, because maybe they're using a PS5, they're using an Android smartphone, perhaps a Windows laptop, and trying to fragment
coordinate all of them
would be impossible. Whereas if they interwork, it doesn't matter.
Mark, you're a parent, and you've got quite young children. And how do you sort of see this screen time issue and sort of what Andrew's talking about of like having one central parental controls I don't know, like control station, HQ?
I'm very excited about this. To be honest, I completely understand the problem. My household is, largely an Apple household when it comes to the sort of the parents and the older members of the family. But I'm very aware that Apple has historically been not so great at the parental controls. So I've been very reluctant to give my younger children Apple devices, whereas actually Amazon has it a lot more cracked and locked down, so they have Amazon device. But of course, then you have the interoperability challenges that presents. And as you say, there's always access to other types of devices in the household, whether that be TVs and other things, where you're never quite sure you've always done the right thing. So a sense of centralised policy control for the household affecting all devices is immensely exciting.
You're an engineer, so you have a lot more technical know-how than I would say the average parent. How do you find parental controls at the moment? Are they intuitive, easy to use?
Once again, it is very platform specific, and I would say that in the Amazon world, it's brilliant. It's very locked down. It's very obvious. My wife is semi-technical, but she has full confidence in controlling that system. I think for the Apple ecosystem, like I say, it's a little bit more tricky. There are good screen time support, so locking down the amount of time that your children spend on devices is very straightforward, and again, very layperson friendly. But the content filtering aspect is much more challenging in that environment.
I want to challenge both of you and kind of problematize this a bit more, because this week the BBC have published a featured article entitled "What Screen Time Does to Children's Brains is More Complicated Than It Seems," and it includes analysis of hundreds of studies and expert opinions from researchers, psychologists, and paediatricians. And one study looked at 11,000 brain scans of children and found that there is no real discernible signal that suggests that excessive screen time leads to the things that we worry about, like poor mental health, cognitive difficulties, or delays with language. So I'm very interested in this idea of sort of quantity versus quality. So, the time that children are actually spending on screens versus what they're looking at. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts on this issue and on the BBC study as well?
So if I approach it in two different ways, I completely take the point that there's no problem per se with using screens. I think we do need to reflect on it does mean that there's a lack of physical activity, potentially. So I still think there's validity in having an absolute limit on screen time so that your child can go off and do other stuff as well. But then to layer in if you like, I think the point that the BBC was probably driving at, which is it's what you're doing that is most important. And I think I've seen other studies which look at the behaviour of social media platforms and the way that the algorithms deliberately prompt greater usage. That you're monetising engagement, so therefore they give you sort of positive feedback. So you seek more. So there's a sort of reward culture. And of course, in some of the darker recesses of the internet, there's positively harmful stuff as well. So if all you did was to say, I'm going to limit your screen time, that is interesting, but certainly insufficient. What you then need to get into is, okay, so do I want to block access to specific applications or specific categories of content? So it's a lot more nuanced than just, it's 3 hours a night and job done for a parent, sadly, which obviously puts a lot more burden on parents. Because a lot of the, going back to parental controls for a moment, the different platforms use different language to mean the same thing, or confusingly sometimes the same language to mean different things. So a parent needs to invest a lot of time to get on top of that.
And learn about all these different systems, different words, taxonomies.
Yes.
I'm going to turn to Mark for his thoughts, but before we do that, it's time for our Guilty Pleasure Online. Andrew Campling, what is your Guilty Pleasure Online?
I think this counts. I enjoy walking. So most mornings when I'm not doing interesting things like this. I'll go out for usually about an 8 to 10 kilometre walk before I start work.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I like that is because obviously it's good for mental health, but also linking hopefully to the guilty pleasure, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So
Amazing.
my guilty
Yeah.
pleasure is science fiction and fantasy.
I see.
And
Yeah.
I'll be delighted if I find a series of books, preferably 50,
Any
60 hours
particular
worth.
recommendations, or is it just anything and everything?
At the moment, I'm listening to a lot of stuff by Adrian Tchaikovsky.
Okay.
One I've just listened to, Service Model, I think it's called, which is, I think, bears comparisons to sort of current challenges. It's about, it's focused more on robots, but you could easily apply it to AI and the problem when it's mainly robots running stuff and what happens when it all goes horribly wrong.
Yeah.
So anyone wants to sort of
Yeah.
read that, I'd recommend
And
Service
tell
Model.
tell us what you think in the comments. Have you read this book? Do you think that's... I would say that's probably our most lovely, uplifting and positive guilty pleasure because we've had some, robots that are rubbish or people burning their hair off by mistake, trying to dye it blonde. These are the kind of, the calibre of guilty pleasure. So that's the most...
Sorry to hear about Mark's problems there, but...
Is that what happened, Mark?
Well, that would be telling, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Coming for Mark and his hair there. So, we're going to carry on talking about parental controls and screen time. So I feel like, what do you feel, Mark, about sort of what Andrew is saying about screen time versus screen quality? What are your thoughts as a parent?
Yes, I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's been a problem for a long time. I mean, actually, when I grew up in the 80s, we were, there were comments like, "Oh, you'll get square eyes if you watch too much TV." That was so it's been a thing that's been around for a while. This concern about too much time in front of, devices. And I think, as a parent, you have to also look at the evidence and also look at your individual children, how they respond. So, for example, my daughter, who's now 7. In the morning, she'll have a bit of TV time while we're sort of getting up, and that's fine for breakfast. But it takes me a good 3 or 4 minutes to attract her attention away from the device, and to actually, and there's a sort of almost like a kind of strong force of attraction with the device. That sort of means that they're sort of completely switched off at times from the whole what's going on around them, and it can be very frustrating as a parent to then try and pull them in. And I do see mood changes with my children. If they get up and they decide to do some creative play together, which does sometimes happen, or we go out, as Andrew mentioned, and go for a walk or go and play in the park for a bit, the mood is often different, shall we say, to if they're just sat in front of a TV and the word zombified might come into play here, and it can create physical and mood
I really feel,
changes.
As a former speech and language therapist, I feel for parents, and particularly parents of young children, because I feel like there's very, very strong messages that are quite conflicting. So, for example, the World Health Organization recommends that children under 5 have no more than 1 hour of sedentary screen time a day and none at all for children under 2. But now we're getting experts kind of arguing a bit more that it's about what they're doing online. And, the NSPCC takes a bit more of a nuanced view. They have lots of structured guidance for different ages. So they're like, under 2, you can do screen time, say, to FaceTime Granny, or, and this social screen time. So, Andrew, I want to think about, a child could use an iPad for 5 minutes and watch something really horrific that traumatizes them for life, or they could spend 4 hours, doing FaceTime, supervised with a parent, learning about stuff. What are your thoughts on this balance, this quality versus quantity?
Well, as I said earlier, I do think there's value in having an absolute limit so that they do other stuff, and sort of touching on Mark's point, that so they're not entirely sedentary. But equally, absolutely, if they're doing things which are, say, educational, it's hard to argue against that. But so wear my Internet Watch Foundation hat for a moment. We do see significant problems where a child is happily, using a game, but then is contacted through the game by effectively over by a predator, and then swiftly moved onto an encrypted messaging platform.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are statistics which show it can take literally less than a couple of minutes for a child to fall victim of sextortion. So
which can have really horrendous outcomes.
Which absolutely can, and so yeah, I mean, yes, you need to talk to your children about what they're doing and so on, but I think sometimes people that are against controls use that as the sort of the get out of jail card, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think you can't educate your children to protect them, against all of these harms. So going back to parental controls, that's where things like parental controls can absolutely help as a sort of safety net. So you can stop access to, for example, some of the encrypted messaging platforms to greatly reduce the risk of those problems. But as I say, I think I still believe that having an absolute limit on screen time is beneficial, and getting them moving, doing other things, is important.
Because that's a sort of, there's a physical health argument, there's a mental health argument, but there's also a sort of preparedness. And like you're saying, there's these malicious people out there. And Mark, I'm really interested because the other day you told me that your young children don't have access to the internet. And I'm really interested in sort of like, do you feel, is there a bit too much of a sort of like abstinence culture with screen time that then maybe we're not sort of thinking about online safety and the difference between an online device and an offline device for a child? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, to be clear, my children don't have direct access to Google search in that way, but they have access to curated content. And there's a difference there. So I mean, and
is
actually,
that like sort of YouTube for kids, or?
Yeah, and I think I back to the quality point. I'm really keen on the quality point, and I mean, I went through an exercise of completely shutting down a lot of even the YouTube kids content, because it was just very badly made, very poorly produced content, which was, had no educational value whatsoever and was absolute utter rubbish, being frank. And actually, but you're right, there's a lot of content that is curated, which is great. There's some really good material made by the BBC, which is, fun but educational. And I think there's, I'm all in favour of that. I mean, ironically, of course, whilst my children have direct access to the internet, my 8-year-old son is very curious. He'll say to me, "Oh, what about this, that, and the other?" And my first approach is always going to be, "Oh, let's look it up." So he will with me, because of course you want to sort of, let's watch a video on how cheetahs run. Let's actually. And
that's really, the NSPCC really advocate that supervised engagement
access,
where it's the parent and the child together.
So you're not sort of like, you're not sort of removing your children in a sort of slightly Amish sort of community thing and saying, actually, we're not going to do the internet. What we're saying is, actually, we're going to let you do things which we know, and actually the great thing is other platforms are doing for us now, that it's being curated for you, and you can be more sure about it. We're not going to give you unfettered access to Google search to find whatever you like and go to dodgy sites, etc. But actually, when you do want to find things, we will use Google. We will use ChatGPT to generate a quiz, for example. That's the best one at the moment. My kids love that. Yeah. Do me a quiz on some topic, and then it's brilliant for that. So it's using things appropriately, and also I think as Andrew said, thinking about quality and limiting the amount of time as well is really important.
So just as a last thing from both of you, like, if you could say in one word or maybe 2 words, what one thing should we all be doing to keep children safe online? Andrew?
Oh gosh, one. Well, I suppose as a minimum, talk to the children, because no matter how careful you are with your technical controls, children are clever, they're creative. They will sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately find ways to circumvent controls. So if you've not had those conversations, then they'll be horribly unprepared for what happens next.
And what about you, Mark?
Yeah, I would say that transparency of communication is as is really important. That's a primary one. But I think also, I think engaging with not sort of being passive, actually being active about the content your children are watching, and I mean, my older daughter's actually behind the cameras today, working with us this morning. She will probably give you a sort of, that I was a fairly strict in terms of the access they had growing up. But I think actually being engaged with the problem and actually not just letting things, just play out, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you both. That was really interesting. What do you think, viewers? Do you think that screen-free parenting is the way forward, or is there more that we can do to protect children online? We're going to move on to our final topic, but before that, it's time for our Tech Room 101.
Room 101.
Andrew Campling, what is your Tech Room 101?
So having given this a bit of thought, I was sort of torn between two, but the one I decided to pick topically is AI.
AI. You hate AI, all AI?
So to expand on that a little bit, my pet hate is that people call it AI, and then have this horrible problem for hallucinations. If we actually were more honest and called it statistics, we would understand that all hallucinations are they've used statistics to say this is probably the answer to that question, but occasionally that will be wrong. So most of what we currently call AI is not at all artificially intelligent. It's just some clever statistics with a really big database. So my 101 is to ban the term AI from
statistics instead.
For pretty much everything at the moment. And AI would take over the world sounds horrific. Statistics taking over the world sounds pretty improbable when you actually get down to it.
So it's more the word AI than the actual
it's
AI
mis-selling.
Predictive responses or something like that.
Which is a bit dull, but
that kind of metaphor.
It's not sexy, but it's a bit more accurate.
We have a video essay on the Internet Seriously, chronically online video essay series, which is about this exact topic of using the term AI when actually AI isn't sentient yet.
I didn't know that. So
well, there we go. So please check it out, viewers, and anyone watching at home. Well, that does link very nicely into our final topic, which is about ChatGPT phishing attacks. So WhatsApp have removed 6.8 million accounts linked to phishing scams, and many of them are powered by AI. And so ChatGPT-5 has been released today. So, the biggest and bestest yet version. So, Mark, what do you think about, ChatGPT fueled scams, and is there anything that we can do to combat this problem?
I think it's going to become an increasingly difficult challenge. WhatsApp's a very interesting specific example because, of course, one of the WhatsApp guarantees is that your messages are encrypted in such a way that that even Meta can't read your messages. They can read the metadata around the messages, but of course the challenge is that these systems are getting more and more proficient at simulating actual users.
People who might not have this technical knowledge, what's metadata when it comes to a WhatsApp message?
yes. So what Meta, the company, would claim not to overlook the term.
It's not metadata. Isn't to do with Meta.
No, it's not. No. So what Meta, the company, their claim is that if you send a message to somebody on WhatsApp, it's fully encrypted. They can't even read it. So you can be sure about that. But what they do have access to is the other data around that message. So who sent it, who received it, when it was sent, and I suspect a number of other metrics that we wouldn't even think about. Things such as geographically where it came from, and all those things would be available. So I guess the challenge is though that AI tooling is now getting and for a long time has been very good at simulating real use. So the actually spotting that something is not a real person, sending a message, particularly if you can't read the message itself, it's becoming harder and harder. So I think it is. It's likely to be become a new sort of whack-a-mole problem. I think for the industry trying to work out. We already know. You may know already that AI is being used on both sides of the scam fighting operation. There are companies now who are releasing AI bots to challenge scammers. and
Yeah.
I guess in a sort of fairly positive way,
And
to
sort of
actually
waste their time,
and
catch
definitely,
them.
you know, we've spoken to Kit Boger before. We've spoken to other people who do these kind of
scam
baiting
Yeah.
using AI. So it has its positive side, but I think the more serious other side of it is it's going to become a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Andrew, these, the 6.8 million WhatsApp accounts, what they found was that, we have these sort of scam farms where organised criminal gangs will set up, kind of a massive warehouse of people who are they're forced to commit scams in a way that is, borderline modern slavery. And what are your thoughts about, the strategies that we're using currently to combat scams? And do you think that there's more that could be done?
Well, there's definitely a lot more that can be done, and I guess in a way those sort of farms, scam farms, if you like, are potentially being replaced by sort of the automated scamming, which is highly micro-targeted. And highly automated, which is it's a disturbing use of technology because it makes it increasingly difficult to spot because it's much more personalised to me rather than just generic stuff, which most people you can spot fairly obviously that it's.
We had an example which was because there's this thing called social engineering, which is like where a scammer kind of does background research on you, and they'd figured out that one of the CEOs was travelling to America, and they'd sent a WhatsApp message being like, "Oh, hi, we're just in America and I've lost my phone," from a new number. Completely plausible.
Yeah.
They knew a lot of stuff, and it's, do you think that sort of AI is helping power this social engineering, or is this just a problem that would exist without AI?
It's a problem that would exist without AI, but it's a problem that's greatly exacerbated by AI, by technology, if you will. And when I'm involved with the Internet Watch Foundation, a lot of people push back on protective measures, saying technology can't solve societal problems, as a sort of generic throwaway comment. I think completely ignoring that this will be a classic example where technology is absolutely causing or hugely magnifying societal problems. So I think it's a very glib statement to try and absolve technology of any responsibility. And I do recall at the Internet Governance Forum in Riyadh at the end of last year, Vint Cerf was on a panel, and I sort of posed a question in this general space, and he agreed that I can't remember his exact phrasing, but it was along the lines of, we do need to be able to pierce the veil of anonymity in order to sort of identify perpetrators. So to using the sort of the WhatsApp example, be able to tell who the end user is, or in this case that it might be AI.
Yeah.
So we can't keep using privacy as a reason to
not share
not share things. So again, using my IWF example, we know that offenders use WhatsApp to share CSAM content. It will be trivially easy to stop that, but sort of people who use privacy as a reason to say no, we can't. My view is we absolutely should, and the same with a lot of these scams. We could do more.
Yeah, definitely been a problem, because my background as a speech therapist, I look a lot into sort of child protection cases, like the Laming inquiry. And, in 2009, Lord Laming said the words like these, things like GDPR were never intended to prevent information sharing, and that often, in healthcare in particular, where it's all about patient confidentiality, it's like you actually have a duty to report, not just a duty to, to keep information confidential. So, Mark, you're wearing a GSE t-shirt today. What does the GSE, what does it stand for? What does it do? And is it to do with scams and fraud? Is it to do with information sharing? And what could it do to help turn the tide on scams and fraud?
Absolutely. So the GSE is the Global Signal Exchange. It's a new entity which has started at the beginning of this year. And what its main purpose is to turn the tide on scams and frauds by effectively gathering and providing as much data and information about scams and fraud to the people that are best placed to take action. And that's our priority.
It's this metadata you were talking about, so the sort of who sent this message, who did they send it to, where was it sent from, and that does come into it. I mean, a large the sort of first starting point really is identifying where the problems are. So that might be URLs or domain names that have been identified as being problematic. It might be down the line telephone numbers, bank account numbers, card numbers that have been identified for fraud purposes. And really what you're looking at with the GSE is what we call the whole fraud attack chain, which obviously starts, when scammers, when they actually start out, they go through a sort of sequential process of establishing infrastructure, which often means, registering companies, registering bank accounts, getting domain names, getting infrastructure in place. And then they move on to obviously, starting to advertise services, to trap people. And then it often goes into a more sort of financial fraud sort of point where they're taking money from consumers. And so we can see the GSE site is up on the screen. Yes. And the global cost of cybercrime continues to rise, powered by AI, ? I was also very interested, Andrew, in your sort of tying this back to AI and ChatGPT, your thoughts on the hallucinations and also this thing of entirely AI powered disasters, because I saw a story this morning saying that we're now getting cases of people having ChatGPT induced psychosis, and including children. And what are your thoughts on this? We've talked about AI therapists on the show before. What do you think about ChatGPT induced psychosis?
So this would probably be an unlikely phrase, but probably worth saying. I am not a psychologist. But in fact, we've seen already, even sort of relatively early days for developments, AI, relationships, often girlfriends. Seems to be more of a male than a female thing, I believe. I think possibly I may have read about AI marriages or someone wanting to marry their AI girlfriend, which is quite scary. So I think people seemingly unable to differentiate between the sort of real and the virtual, and maybe that in of itself makes a strong case for needing to have guardrails, so it's clear that you're conversing with a
pretend entity.
An artificial entity, not a real entity. Because otherwise, I think I can see why that would start potentially to risk causing problems. Or, in the case of if it's an AI therapist, maybe you get too deep into something, and you probably then need to pass it on to an actual human. That can give you much more tailored, as opposed to sort of canned results. And I would be very concerned about hallucinations, say with an AI therapist, that it might give you wrong guidance, which could be quite...
I have a sort of final light-hearted, funny point, which is, I was talking to Mark earlier this week about ChatGPT is very affirming of whatever you say. So I'll put, just a terrible sentence that's misspelt, and it will be like, first of all, I want to say, this is the best writing I've ever seen. And I was saying to the guys, backstage, it's a bit like being in a women's nightclub toilet, of just everyone's there you just look amazing. Your makeup is just incredible. It's like ChatGPT really likes to big you up, and you sort of feel like, thank you. Your writing is incredible. And I think, we've sort of talked about maybe that could be what is leading to these difficulties, but, we're running out of time. I just wanted to read out our comment of the week, which is to do with last week's topic, the UK Online Safety Act, our video, The Law No One Read and Why It's Already a Disaster. And we had April J. Moon, who said, to age verify, you have to upload personal documents with information we are told not to make available online. And if that information is kept private, are each of the sites investigated to see how secure that information is kept in the case of a hacking breach? So that's a very thought-provoking comment just to end with. This week we've been talking about parental controls, screen-free parenting, and ChatGPT phishing attacks. And thank you very much to Andrew, who joined us this week as our guest. I've been Alice, and we've had Mark as well from the Internet Seriously. Thanks very much for listening.